Welcome, friends, to this virtual presentation of No Place for Hate Falmouth's annual commemoration of the birth of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am Elias Lieberman. I serve on the steering committee of No Place for Hate Falmouth with my friends Nell Fields, Sayana Muwasi, Pamela Rothstein, and Olivia Massey-White. You will hear from other members of the steering committee as they introduce our Civic Leadership Awardees and our speaker this morning, Safi Giroux, in the course of this hour-long program. Unfortunately, due to illness, Nell Fields is unable to join us today. Since we gathered last in January of 2020 at the Seacrest Resort in North Falmouth, our nation has experienced a year that we wish we could simply erase. It was a year filled with lethal violence directed at Black Americans, all too often at the hands of police. We remember, especially among so many others, Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, Daniel Prude, Breonna Taylor, Tyree Davis, Jacob Blake. We witnessed the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the state-sanctioned violence directed at Black Lives Matter's protesters. We've endured a president and an administration that consistently endorsed and emboldened white supremacists of every stripe, culminating in deadly mob violence at our nation's capital less than 2 weeks ago. The pandemic that necessitated this virtual gathering has taken a terrible and disproportionate toll on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. But we also experienced a year in which a woman who is Black and South Asian was elected vice president of our nation, as well as stunning Senate race victories in Georgia. That terrible year now behind us has left many of us wondering what Dr. King would be saying, what he would be doing were he alive today. To a certain extent, we can imagine his response, guided by the principles by which he lived and died. But more importantly, we must ask ourselves what we must now do and say to move Dr. King's dreams closer to fruition. Dr. King reminded us that everybody can be great because anybody can serve. That is in part what this day and this gathering is about, asking ourselves how we will serve each other, our nation, and our world. Today, we may not be able to experience the joy of handshakes, hugs, and kisses that we've exchanged at this event in years past. But we can listen with open ears and open hearts to the words we will hear. We can delight in the sight and sound of our community's children giving voice to Dr. King's words. We can find inspiration in the leadership modeled by our Civic Leadership Awardees. And when this program ends, we will be lifted up by that musical statement of faith that declares, "We shall overcome." So settle in, friends, and prepare yourselves for the encouragement, enlightenment, and inspiration we need to make 2021 a year in which we draw ever closer to the fulfillment of the dream that Dr. King bequeathed us. May January of 2022 find us gathered once again over good food and conversation to speak of the progress we will have made in the year that is now unfolding before us. Our program continues with the voices of students from Falmouth's Morse Pond School, sharing an excerpt from Dr. King's dream speech. As always, and especially in this pandemic year, we're grateful to Lynn Busher, a teacher at Morse Pond for the past 27 years, who each year brings us these inspiring young voices, this year virtually. This will be followed by the presentation of our Civic Leadership Awards and our presentation by our guest speaker, Safi Giroux.
Hello, my name is Magdalena. One thing about me, I really like Martin Luther King Day. It's one of my favorite holidays. And it's here for a very special reason.
This is my papa. He was a Marine and served in the Vietnam War. He is African American. He has overcome a lot of prejudice, and I'm proud of him. Okay, now for the speech.
I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
It is a dream, deeply rooted in the American dream.
In the American dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. Behold these truths
To be self-evident
that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day
on the red hills of Georgia,
the sons of former slaves
the sons of former slave owners
will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
even in the state of Mississippi,
A state sweltering with the heat of injustice
sweltering with the heat of oppression,
will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation
Where they will not be judged by the color of their skin.
but by the content of their character.
I have a dream today.
This will be the day when all children will be able to sing with new meaning, "Let freedom ring." Let freedom ring. So let freedom ring from the prestigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York.
But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside.
When we allow freedom to ring from every town and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all children, black men and white men, will be able to join hands and sing the words of the old spiritual. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last!
I have a dream today.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this virtual event. At this time, we would like to make our presentation for the annual Civic Engagement Award. You know, in the past, we have recognized individuals and organizations for their civic engagement in Falmouth during the earlier year. Well, the year 2020 has not been a normal year by any means. It has been a year that started with coronavirus pandemic, which still exists. This year has also been marred by serious racial tension and unbelievable political unrest. We faced complete shutdown and social distancing. We faced COVID fatigue. We faced total isolation. We faced Zoom explosion, and we are still facing many other serious issues. So what did we do? We looked for comfort and solace. We looked for information. We looked for direction. And during these times, these difficult times, it was our local media that came to our rescue. They provided the comfort, solace, information, and direction that we needed. Therefore, the steering committee this year decided that we will recognize 3 local media organizations that has kept us informed, kept us connected, and kept us engaged. So today we recognize these 3 organizations for their dedication to reporting on pandemic-related issues, as well as educating us about the pandemic. They also engage the community with issues of racial equality and social injustice throughout the year. The 3 recipients for 2021 Civic Engagement Award are first, FCTV, Falmouth Community Media Center. Second, CAI, National Public Radio for the Cape Coast and Island, and the Falmouth Enterprise. It's my pleasure to introduce the first recipient of our 2021 award. Now, before I introduce FCTV and Deborah Rogers, I have a public confession to make. I moved to Falmouth 10 years ago, and I had never watched FCTV. It will be till this last year when I first turned on FCTV. I learned about what was happening locally in our town, or just last year. Therefore, I decided that I will join FCTV, pay my membership, and become a duly paid member. I hope you will learn more about FCTV and the other two organizations that we are honoring today by checking out their website and consider becoming a member of these three organizations. Now, you can consider this as my free commercial for the organizations. Please join them and please support them. You know, the recent pandemic has made us more aware than ever that we are truly a global community. What affects one of us impacts all of us. This past year, during the difficult times, when Falmouth faced many historic challenges that affected our future, it was FCTV we tuned in for information. During racial tension around our country, it was FCTV that we turned to. They have been very successful in bringing people together at a time when togetherness is more important than ever. It was FCTV that gave us and still gives us updates on coronavirus and other public health issues. During the racial unrest, it was FCTV that created a new program called The Conversation. Conversation became a place for open dialogue. Conversation became a place for diverse voices to be heard. And these conversations, they are trying to educate and community to the issues of racial justice. I had the privilege to participate in one of the early conversations. These conversations are available on their website that you can check them out. So friends, you will notice that FCTV is here to help everyone. If you need help with live streaming or any production, need help with business meeting, need help in any other event, FCTV is always here to help. They have been blessed to have Deborah Rogers as the executive director and CEO for the last 16 years. She's been a very active community member. She's a founding member of Arts Falmouth, and she serves as a town committee member from Precinct 5. It's my great pleasure and honor to present to you my friend, Deborah Rogers of FCTV.
Thank you, Olivia, so much. Falmouth Community Television has a long history of organizing to empower individuals, organizations, and communities to address significant issues in the pursuit of justice, liberty, and equity. FCTV's mission and values are based on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and in particular, the First Amendment. Our vision is that all communities have the resources, ability, and right to express themselves, create community dialogue, and engage in civil life through local media. Our guiding principles are to promote free speech, expand civic engagement through local media, and to ensure that people can seek redress of their grievances. The power of witness is clear. When the video cameras are rolling, unedited and unfiltered, the truth finds the light of day. This is the fundamental concept of public access and community media, to empower our community voices with the power of media to tell their story their way. We will continue our work to move to a more understanding, compassionate, and welcoming community that supports access, equity, and accountability, free from racism, prejudice, malice, and hate. On behalf of the staff, board of directors, and members of FCTV, and grateful to have Olivia as a member now. I thank the No Place for Hate Committee for this wonderful recognition. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pamela Rothstein, and I serve on the No Place for Hate Steering Committee. I want to, first of all, apologize for the audio problems with the video. We fixed that. I fixed that behind the scenes partway through, I hear, successfully. And so to honor the children and Lynn Busher, their teacher, and the spirit of the day, because they're always part of this, we will show that at the end of the program before we join in We Shall Overcome. It is my privilege and pleasure to present the Civic Engagement Award also to WCAI, NPR for the Cape Coast and Islands, in recognition of the special focus and in-depth reporting and programming on racial and social justice you have offered, especially during the past year. By reporting on local protests and activism, engaging the community in conversation and dialogue through programs like Mindy Todd's The Point, and broadcasting regional shows like Next from the New England Network, as well as offering national news, WCAI has raised our awareness, our understanding of our communities, and provided ways to gain new perspectives on these issues and our towns. We celebrate your commitment and the high quality of work you have done so well, while encouraging CAI to maintain this momentum on key issues for our community as you move beyond your first wonderful and impressive 20 years. I'm going to turn it over to Mindy now.
Thank you, Pamela. That's 20 years. We had our 20th anniversary this year. And of course, the whole idea in the beginning was to have local NPR, but also to give voice to our community, a place for civil conversation. And we strive hard to get as many voices as we can, and also talk a lot about issues that impact all of us. And of course, it's been a challenging year, and with a small staff, I think we're all really proud of the work that they've done. And of course, all of the great input we've had from the community as well, all the great voices that we've had to help us spread that message and educate and help folks through these really challenging times. We're so proud of the work that No Place for Hate does and everything that you do, and we're truly honored with this award. And again, on behalf of all the staff, thank you so much. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being part of our conversations.
I'm back, unfortunately replacing our ill friend and fellow steering committee member, Nell Fields. But again, I have the honor and privilege of making another presentation to the third of these three outstanding local media organizations. This one goes to the Enterprise, which publishes in Falmouth, Sandwich, and Bourne, and will present it to its editor, Bill Huff. Bill, No Place for Hate Falmouth presents the Civic Engagement Award to the Enterprise newspapers in recognition of your commitment to highlighting issues of racial and social justice on the Upper Cape. Through editorials, articles, reporting, photographs, and letter exchanges, the Enterprise has kept racial and social justice and protests against injustice at the front of the news, never letting us forget that we each have a stake in our community and in national politics, and an ability to voice our opinions, face the realities, and make a difference, especially locally. We celebrate the enterprise as a voice of our community and an example of how a local newspaper can help us to understand our own communities and to lead in the ongoing fight for justice.
Well, thank you very much, Pamela. I was expecting my image to come up on the screen and hence the delay there. But I'm truly honored to receive this award on the behalf of myself and the staff. It's truly wonderful. You know, we do what we do because we want to make a difference in the community, and we hope we make a positive influence on the community. But through the day-to-day, we don't often pause to measure what we do. So it is really wonderful to receive an award and be recognized this way. It's the affirmation that we are actually doing something that can make a positive impact in the community. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Sayana Mawusi, and I have the honor and pleasure to introduce our No Place for Hate keynote speaker. I would like to introduce Safi Giroux in the context and in the spirit of Martin Luther King, his legacy and his service, his leadership and his faith, and his commitment to civil rights and a better life for all people in cities, countries, and the world. You know, it was 58 years ago that Martin Luther King stated, "The whirlwind of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. Justice emerges through leadership." How fitting to have Safi Giroux speak to us today. Safi Giroux's fierce determination and dedication to leadership and leadership development, integrated with a strong racial lens, has evolved over the years. She has been an organization consultant and facilitator and supporting over 100, I mean that, yes, 100 organizations and projects of large urban and small communities. I know her as remembering her as the executive director of the Marcus Foster Educational Institute, the executive director of Culture and Arts Division of the City of Oakland, and we worked together on the coordinating consultant. She was the City of Berkeley and the Berkeley Unified School District to kind of bring wraparound services for all its citizens. But Safi right now is currently the Deputy Director and Principal Consultant and Coach at LeaderSpring, where she brings her keen sense of life commitment to the advancement of human dignity. LeaderSprings is an organization, and Safi Giroux might tell you a little bit more about it, is an organization dedicated to creating equity and transformation individually and collectively to optimize leadership for change and structure to oppose and dismantle a system of oppression. Dr. King constantly states, "A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus." Safi is that molder of consensus. Safi Giroux is also a minister with a Master's of Arts degree in spiritual formation and leadership, and is a certified integral coach. She works for the intersection of faith, formation, and justice with equity center foci in all aspects of work. Safi is a sought out keynote speaker. She's a poet, and she used to be a dancer. But I'd be remiss if I did not say that Safi and my connection began as mothers of Black male children who are now fine, young, productive men in society. We have laughed and sometimes cried a tear or two around that experience. So on this day, in remembrance of Martin Luther King, I will give you Safi Giroux. But right before she speaks, I want you to know that our speaker Ms. Giroux will take questions following the presentation. And we're going to ask that you place your questions in the chat function and address it to everyone. And to please keep yourself muted during the time our question and answer period. Thank you. Again, Safi Giroux.
Yeah, well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm from sunny California. It's a beautiful day and Happy New Year anyway. When I came into 2021, January 1, I had a conversation with 2021. And I said, 2021, you know, there's a lot riding on you. There are high hopes for you. There are very high, probably very unrealistic expectations for you. I really hope you are up to the challenge. And maybe 2 days later, or 3 days, or 4 days later, in the same week, we had the insurrection on the Capitol Hill. And I thought, 2021, not so soon. Hold up. But then I had to remember Georgia. And I got very grateful for the fact that there are millions of people who are doing good in this country. So thank you for the introduction, Sayana, and all of you for having me, the No Place Committee, No Place for Hate Committee, for having me this afternoon for you on this wonderful day of celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I want to say congratulations to the 3 honorees as well. And as Sayana has said about our real first introduction, I'm not sure she knows this, but our boys were going to away camp for the summer. And it was the first time for my older son, and I was super nervous. And so I'm standing there, I see all of these families and all of these kids and the kids playing and running around in the buses, and I'm standing there holding his hand, and I'm looking around, and I saw these 2 boys and Sayana and another mom, Lynn. And I said to my son, those 2 boys are your friends. That's who you're going to make friends with when you go to away camp. And today they are, I don't know, 35, 36 years old, and they are still dear friends. So again, I'm happy to be here this morning. We are honoring a non-violent warrior of justice. Someone who stood in the face of violence courageously and with immense conviction to remove the boot of racial oppression of Black people, and therefore for all people. He spoke often of living for something to die for. In many of his speeches, speeches and interviews, he spoke about the importance to know what you would die for, that your life really reveals itself when you are at that moment, when you realize that I will go the distance for what it is that I am convicted to do. He was all in, and he was not alone. I also want to remind you that as we celebrate him now as this powerful leader that had global recognition, he was assassinated. He was not beloved by people, by all people. We have come to understand his impact in hindsight. We often hear the "I have a dream" speech. There were many speeches that he gave that people did not appreciate. The speech he gave the night before he died was one that called for divesting and redirecting Black dollars away from certain companies and into others, to pull Black resources into Black companies, Black banks. The night before he died, he gave that speech. He was very outspoken about the Vietnam War, which was not a popular position the government wanted anyone to have. And he launched a poor people's movement, which would call for billions of federal dollars to be poured into rural and inner city areas. Prior to that, there wasn't a lot of money that needed to be spent, but what he was calling for and what the nation needed to do would cost the government billions of dollars. He was much more than his "I Have a Dream" speech. He and many others were the powerful moral voices of decency and hope for our country. And it still rings true today. So I stand before you this afternoon on a Ohlone tribal ground in Oakland, California. I am the mother of Aaron and Austin, the daughter of Fernette, who is the daughter of Mary Frances, who is the daughter of Carmelita, a descendant of original people of Argentine and Chile region in South America. I want to share a story that will give you a sense of who stands here before you. I was raised in Oakland, California, born in 1960. So raised in the 60s and 70s here, the home of the Black Panther Party. There was a moment when the Oakland Police Department and the FBI killed a 17-year-old party member, Bobby Hutchinson. My mother had witnessed this on, or saw this on the news. It was a big story. Maybe 2 days later, my mother gathered us up, myself, my brother, and my sister. And she was only 29 years old. When I got older, I thought about that. She was only 29. She gathered us up. She drove us a few blocks, really, away. We weren't far from the home where Bobby Hutchinson was murdered. We stood in front of the house. She took us out of the car, stood us in front of the house. And she began to talk about what had happened a couple of days before. And I can see the home right now. It was in West Oakland. And she kept saying, the house looks like Swiss cheese. There were hundreds of rounds of bullets and other weapons that were used to shoot into the house. The law enforcement did not go in. They stood outside and shot into the house. And my mother kept saying, they don't know who was in the house. Children, older people, they had no idea who was there. Let me pause for a minute. They're doing seismic retrofitting on my building, and they're hammering and drilling. So we have some noise in the background. Loud noise. And my mom, as she was telling us this, I was holding her hand. I'm an 8-year-old. And I looked up at her. Uh-oh, someone's phone. I remember looking up at her, and there were tears like coming down her face, and I could feel in her this deep sadness and this intense anger. And as she was talking about not knowing who was possibly in the house, and she kept saying he was only 17 years old, and my mom was only 29. And she said to us, look at that house. You can see clear to the backyard from where we were standing. And I felt this deep sense from my mother that we were to be about justice, that we were to have a voice for justice, that we were not people who did not speak the truth to power. That's not who my mother was. And this was, I will say, standard procedure for her. We never watched rallies and marches on television if they were in the Bay Area, never. We joined the rally. I was formed in justice, nourished in love, and raised in radical regard for human dignity. My mother was one who felt you should always risk it in support of anyone suffering indignity at any time. And I carry this into all that I do. In my work as a facilitator, trainer, coach, anti-racism practitioner, and minister of Christian spiritual formation and leadership. So as I stand here today, I say, courage is calling. It is calling for leadership to step up with a racial justice lens. In my work at Leader Springs Center here in Oakland, we work with social sector leaders, hundreds of them, social sector leaders, in a 2-year fellowship that cultivates their leadership. And we posit that racial equity and racial justice are 21st century leadership competencies. And that as you stand in leadership places and spaces and any opportunity that you have to mold and shape organizations, communities, government agencies, et cetera, racial justice and equity needs to be part of your competency. Leaders can no longer be without this lens. Our nation, our world is calling for it. And I say again, it takes courage. We also work with businesses, nonprofit organizations, government, universities, and anti-racism work, those who want to engage with that. And I do have to say that it is a wonderful thing to see transformation happening in people. When folks, the most unlikely, are emboldened in a company, and I'll just mention one person, a self-identified cisgender white male who has been in leadership positions most of his life. To see him champion racial equity, interrupt microaggressions, develop policies for the company that sustain a culture of inclusion and belonging is something the rest of his team would never think that he would have ever come to. In our assessment, he was the problem that everyone felt in the company. And he has completely transformed. Courage is calling for this type of leadership. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of bad people and the violent actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of good people." Leadership is calling for good people. Courage is saying, come good people. Good people are needed. Now that 2020 has revealed to everyone at the same time in full color the gross, deep, and abiding racial hatred in millions of Americans and racial inequities across all systems in our society, health, education, employment, housing, policing, criminal justice, etc. What is our response in 2021? What is it asking for us? Courage is calling on leadership. Martin Luther King said, "May I stress the need for courageous, intelligent, and dedicated leadership. Leaders who can subject their particular egos to the greatness of the cause, who are not in love with publicity, but in love with justice." And I'll add that the greatness of the cause is to obliterate racism, dismantle every system that is oppressive, to rescue freedom, and to lift human dignity. Because racism is a violent and murderous, not only of the body, but of the mind and the spirit. And this must be a leadership concern. Leadership requires those in positions of power and authority to courageously combat racism in all its forms. It will take courage, boldness, relentless commitment to liberation of those who suffer most under racist practices and systems. You cannot be a 21st century leader without an anti-racist lens. This issue of gross and blatant racial injustice in America is shameful. It's long, and it's contrary to its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. I am not speaking only of police brutality, but Black and Indigenous maternal and infant deaths that are the highest of any other population and that are high. COVID-19's impact on Black, Brown, and Indigenous populations, the exodus of Black and Brown people in tech corporations. 21st century leadership requires an examination of white supremacist norms and practices that are lurking around your work culture, structures, and civic and community life. I say this definitively because there is not a US institution that was not embedded with the ideology of white supremacy. 21st century leadership requires a deep reckoning with internal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism and oppression. It requires being comfortable with discomfort, leading into radical discomfort that leads to radical transformation. When initiating some of the more difficult conversations about race, courage calls. 21st century leadership requires vulnerability, transparency, accountability, which are key elements to building trust for the courageous work of racial justice. It requires open acknowledgement of the reality of racial trauma that has been and is being experienced by many people. '21st century leadership cannot be silent or passive. It requires action. Progressive ideology is not enough. Action, small, large, personal, individual, community, national, is required. It is calling for leaders to speak the truth to power in love, to organize in love, and to do that over and over and over again until there is the change that we truly want to see. When I think of the folks who we are working with right now, the companies and organizations who have taken on the challenge to change the way that they are doing their work. Many of the structures that we walk into or that we actually are invited into, and many structures are, these organizations are working with unsheltered populations in our communities, those that are hungry, working in education, working against violence against women and children, sex trafficking, those that are suffering from food insecurities, which is another way of saying hunger. These leaders are on the front lines of re-engaging formerly imprisoned persons back into the population in a meaningful way. They are boots on the ground for those who don't have voices in any other places. And so as we hold the space, for them in their work, understanding, helping them to understand that direct service provision, for people are as critical as those that are building movements to change systems and policies that will impact the need for the direct services that are being provided. We bring all of these people together to have conversations with one another about how to work together to do what it is that needs to be done. We cannot do that work, and we do not initiate that work without building trust. What is necessary in trust is vulnerability, is honesty. We have had some very hard conversations with people, or they have had conversations with each other, but that moved them to a different way of communicating with each other and being with each other and trusting each other to the point that they could work together on anything. At the end of, it's a 2-year fellowship, and at the end of the fellowship, there is a body of people in each one of these cohorts that can do much more together, usually do much more together than they did when they first stepped into that fellowship. So we have seen over and over and over and over again, stepping into and addressing the difficult conversation and issue around race, internally, interpersonally, institutionally, for them to be quite powerful. What many of these organizations are doing today, together with other people, really learning how, learning how to work together and forward something into the community that is collective, that is intersectional, where they're not siloed anymore. They have voices that connect with them to do the work. What has become clear for everyone is that one system, when you're thinking about systems, one system impacts another and another. Systems really aren't siloed. So when we talk about healthcare, and when we talk about education, and when we talk about economic equity, they're all connected. People may choose a cause, but they're all connected. We have the opportunity in these cohorts to bring all of that together and work together. 21st century leadership in calling for action and requiring action. I say again that action needs to be in love. It is calling because the internal and external resistance to racial justice is also quite real. Think about what may hold you back from engaging in or adopting an anti-racism philosophy, actively identifying, opposing, and changing structures of racism. When I think about what happened on the Capitol, the images that we saw, I really feel and felt in that moment that our collective humanity as a nation is at a precipice. And it has felt like it has been there many, many, many times. But on a global front, people know the underbelly of America like they've never known before. We have witnessed together the loss of humanity in the souls of people perpetrating racial violence through their deeds. Many of those who were murdered by the hands of police was mentioned earlier. But when we witnessed a police officer's knee on the neck of George Floyd, we saw in full color what that racial violence really looked like in the soul of another human being. We have also witnessed it in words. I am still gripped by T-shirts worn by some of the insurrectionists, 6MWE. 6 million wasn't enough. I am gripped by that. Courage is calling us. And who will answer? What keeps us at bay? I'll end with these quotes by Martin Luther King and John Lewis. Dr. King said, "The ultimate logic of racism is genocide." And Lewis encouraged us all to get into trouble. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. I thank you for having me and for listening. I am complete and have left time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Safi. I'm going to pose one or two questions to you. Our first is, what have you found most successful that you have done in your leadership coaching to help racist leaders see themselves objectively and begin to act and transform themselves and their organizations?
Yeah, the example that I gave of the gentleman, he's actually in a tech firm, and he is one of, I would say maybe, one of maybe 15 people who was open to hearing what other people were saying about his impact on their felt safety within the organization. He was open to hear and to receive some really challenging feedback from people, and it's a process that we take people through. We knew this was a part of what was happening with the company because we do a very deep assessment before we begin. And so we create a space that is a brave space that requires courage and also non-judgment, from people when we take them through a process to really understand that and know that and feel that. So over the course of, this has been a year that we've been working with this company. And over the course of the year, it has been reflected back to us, and we've received feedback from other members of the company calling out what's happening with this person. And we've even had calls, from him, what's happening. So we go back in and we're checking in, on the company and asking him with everyone else, like what's happening, what's going on, with you, What was the turn? What happened? And it was hearing people's stories and being impacted by the reality of another human being's reality that was not his. And we know that research has shown that, just giving people statistics, high statistics for inequality doesn't move people so much. It really is stories, individual stories, collective stories that people resonate with in their heart and in their soul. So, and I say he's an example of many in other organizations that we work with. So we actually take people through a process of engagement with themselves and with other people to get to a place where they can embrace something new for them, because everyone that we work with are good people. No one's a bad person, right? But we have every single person born, raised, and who have come to America are subject, to a lot that's outside of ourselves, So when folks understand that bias is something that is intrinsic in all of us, then there is some space for feeling that, yeah, I may be carrying that, right? Yeah, so I'm not sure if I answered that.
Friends, we are going to close as we traditionally do, but virtually. At the end of our Martin Luther King celebrations each year, we stand, we join hands, we join together in singing, "We Shall Overcome." Doesn't really work very well with Zoom, but there's a beautiful rendition of that song, that hymn, this one by the choral group from Morehouse College. And I'm going to bring that up for screen sharing. And that's how we will bid farewell to each other and look forward to being together physically in January of 2022.
Friends, this concludes our program. We want to give our thanks to Dr. Giroux for joining us from California with your inspiring words, to Lynn Busher for organizing her children, even in pandemic conditions, to our awardees for their words and commitment to giving voice to our community so we better understand each other and are open to change perspectives. And we sincerely hope that we will be together next year at this time. So thank you. And we apologize to anyone who was unable to participate. This was scheduled to admit up to 500, so we don't understand why it capped at 100. So please convey that to anyone who had trouble getting in today. Go out and serve our community. Be well and stay healthy.